This is your host, Jane Hales, and welcome to today's episode of .Team Talks, a podcast all about driving transformative growth through innovative and everyday automation solutions. Let's dive in and start to tame your tech today. In this episode, we explore how strategy and automation work together to drive success. From streamlining operations to making smarter business decisions, discover how leveraging technology can give you a competitive edge. Get ready for insights that will transform the way you approach growth. Thank you. Right, I am so pleased today. I have Mick. I was going to say O'Conchuir, but that's not how you say it.
I say O'Conchuir, but
Cool.
everybody calls me Mick or Mick from Ireland. So you're welcome to do that.
That's very kind, but I'm sure there's more than one Mick from Ireland.
But yeah, that's quite true, but it's still the option people go to rather than pronouncing my name.
Lovely. Well, what's brilliant, I mean, you've worked in the UK, you've worked in Switzerland, you've worked all over the place, and you've had a really interesting career. And many of the things we speak about is key moments in our career as to the pivotal moments, the things that we've learned. And just from the audience perspective, I see that you started off sales and brand manager for P&G, a huge company. Then you've gone on to a series of consultancy gigs, including sports, and then lecturing has come into your box in terms of offering services to other people as well. So, I mean, this is great to be able to learn from a lecturer, an expert in a field, and somebody with a passion for tech and sport. So this is brilliant. Thank you so much. And it was great to meet recently while we were both doing the Active Campaign study hall, of which we have both learnt things and we have made decisions off the back of that. Really interesting.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. It would be great, if you don't mind, sort of taking us back to the beginning of your career journey. And I thought it was quite interesting that you started off in sales and then you went to marketing. I mean, sometimes never the twain will meet, and some people call it schmarketing because the two do need to meet. I mean, tell me about what got you there.
It's an interesting area. Even up until very recently, I've had the conversation about what exactly the difference between sales and marketing is. But as you say, one of the differences, they tend not to get on. I'm reminded of my time in sports, not the company I work for, but there's a very well-known sports company, one of the two biggest in the world, who had to separate the sales and marketing departments, had them on different floors. Such was the animosity between them. I was in university in Dublin, and I actually started with P&G mainly because they had a quite well-paid internship, so summer job, and I was also told that they didn't employ Irish people at the time, which is really sort of what got me interested in them. I'd actually gone to the university I was at to study. I studied a general business degree, but figured I'd take the summer job in the meantime. So mainly based on that, I applied to marketing, was, for want of a better way of putting it, recruited by people in the sales department. I just wanted the job, didn't mind. So I ended up in sales, and they offered me a job before my final year in university. Interestingly, and perhaps somewhat controversially, given I ended up lecturing myself, the proctor don't care what you do in university or what you get. You need to have a degree, but they don't care whether it's a first or not. That they offered me a job before my final year, which made it very hard to study given their lack of emphasis on results. So I joined the sales department there, spent some time in Scotland, in Ireland, and in the UK, all very quickly over maybe 2, maybe up as far as 3 years. It's interesting the way you say the difference between sales and marketing. I actually wanted to switch into brand management and marketing department at P&G, and I wasn't able to, so I quit. It's a longer story, but ended up in South America for about 2 years. Then came back, started looking for a job, and was offered a job in marketing in P&G. So I do joke that the way to switch from sales to marketing in P&G is to spend 2 years in Brazil. So that got me in there. I worked in Ireland for a time and then moved to Switzerland. Basically, the way Procter set up, if you want to progress in marketing in Europe, you need to go to the European headquarters in Switzerland. There's a corporate setup about the ownership of brands and so on. That got me to Switzerland, spent almost 15 years there. Not all of it with Procter. I went to work for a sports company called Amber Sports, which nobody's heard of, but they own a range of brands, everything from Arc'teryx, which is sort of trendy at the moment, to Salomon, if you like skiing, Mavic, if you like cycling, and if you don't like any of those things, Wilson, of the tennis rackets, and the football of American football is Wilson as well. So I spent some time there too. And then after about 15 years, came to the UK. And I've been working as an independent consultant since. We've been here about 5 years, maybe a bit more now. As part of that, I do what's called either adjunct lecturing or associate lecturing, depending what country you're in. I see it more as another client or as another gig. Although I had always wanted to be involved in lecturing, whether teaching or even coaching, depending on how you look at it, but also I guess, thinking about parts of both marketing and business strategy.
Okay, tell me more. What do you mean, both marketing and business?
So it tends to get split, and strategy tends to cover everything. Strategy one-pager or strategy one-pager.com is what I call myself or ourselves, depending on, from time to time, I've worked with partners. And the main sort of, we've got two main focuses. One is on marketing strategy or brand strategy. So typically it would be called product market fit, value propositions, positioning, targeting, objective setting. That area typically leads through to the execution within certainly smaller companies anyway. And spend a lot of time doing that, but also a focus on strategy, building a framework that helps companies be more effective from a day-to-day strategy point of view, through to an objective setting and tracking system called the OKRs. We help make those work. It's often joked that OKRs were set up as a PsyOps initiative by Google in order to handicap competition, because so many people struggling with actually implementing them. So one of the things we do is make OKRs work. And all of that then is centered around a strategy framework called the OGSM, which Procter & Gamble use extensively. And you often get people who've worked for Procter then taking it to other companies. It was invented in Japan in the early 80s, but really adopted by P&G and brought globally. So you'll see it in places like Coca-Cola, Tesla, and so on. And it's a framework. OGSM stands for Objective Goals, Strategies, and Measures, but it helps clarify strategic thinking. And although popular, it's in all those companies, there's very little teaching or coaching in relation to it available. I think I just about know everybody in the world who provides it, but it's never really caught on in that sense. That's the basis for the strategy one-pager, which we'll do and look at business strategy. So it's a long-winded way of describing what strategy one-pagers do. I often shorten it by saying, if you're ever in a meeting and somebody says, okay, look, we're beating around the bush here, we're not making any progress, or just says, we got to be strategic immediately. Right now, the next thing you say has got to be about strategy. What do you say? And it's to bring people to an understanding of that and then build plans based on that understanding.
Okay, interesting. So there's quite a few acronyms there, and you mentioned that people have difficulty in implementing OKRs and so forth. Mm-hmm. What are the bits that people tend to struggle with the most, do you think? As you say, because sometimes it's a mind-blowing thing when you say strategy, isn't it? I absolutely get that. But what is it that particularly trips people up?
There's two areas. One is that strategy, unless you're a bit odd like myself, very few people consider or really think about what strategy actually means. It means it's important. So this is strategic. And often it means long-term plans, which in the long-term plans piece I actually disagree with. I think it's fundamental to achieving objectives, but it doesn't necessarily have to be long-term. The understanding what strategy is and the use of the word strategic tends to be confusing. If your job has strategy in it, you get paid more than someone whose job doesn't have that title, that word in the title. And then the second area is in terms of actually being strategic. What are the key levers? What are the key factors? What are the key decisions that will actually help a company progress, as opposed to doing stuff that you think you're supposed to do? So to give a practical example, and we'll probably come on to it in the context of automation, If you look at the world of digital marketing, I've worked with a lot of companies that just feel we need to do Instagram because everybody does Instagram, or we need to do other forms of content. Just 1 second. I'm on the phone. I'll talk to you later. Your mum's upstairs. Sorry about that. I just had
That's okay.
if you look at the world of digital, people feel like we need to do digital marketing, for example, and without asking the question why. In a very simple sense, we go, well, why would you do that? What are you trying to achieve? And then build strategic thinking into the decision-making process in companies. And that typically leads to a plan, but fundamentally it's about effectiveness in achieving objectives and the decision-making around getting to that objective.
Super. So the phrase KPIs are often dotted in at this kind of stage, the measuring of the impact, the measuring of what you're trying to do. How does that fit into your frameworks?
So within, going back to say the OGSM, objective goal strategy measures, KPIs would be the measures in that. Typically, what a KPI will be used to do is to check, how do you know you've been successful in a strategy? And a KPI would look to that. Now, within KPIs, key performance indicators, the key is the strategic part and what actually is going to have the biggest effect on achieving the objective. Strategy is about effectiveness in achieving an objective. Well, a longer definition, but that's a key piece of your understanding there. The first thing is, if your hypothetical boss says to you, be strategic right now, I say to people, just say these words, because once you say them, you are by definition being strategic. And that is, what is the objective? So first of all, what are you trying to achieve? Strategy is effectiveness in achieving that. So what are you trying to achieve? Really understand what the objective is. To put it in more popular strategic language, what game are we playing? So what's the game or what's the objective is the most fundamental part. And then everything you do should strive to achieve that. And the effectiveness, so what decisions do you make about that are most effective in achieving that objective? And so that's the key performance indicator. It's another idea that if it's strategic, it is key to being effective to achieve the objective. And then how do you know that you've actually done that would be a KPI. A practical rule of thumb there as well is once you get into these conversations about what's the objective and what's most effective in achieving that objective, people tend to run out of steam before they get to the KPIs. So KPIs tend to be afterthoughts or not a lot of work put into them. But a KPI is not important unless you're actually measuring the right thing. So you need to measure something that will be effective in achieving results rather than measuring activity. And again, I have automation in the back of my head all the time when we're talking here. That's also the big watch out for any of the activities you do, and certainly any of the activities you do more of through automation.
Interesting. I love the fact that you are dotting automation in bits and pieces in places. Coming back to getting people to think strategically, one of the issues I sometimes have is getting people to dream about the possibility of what could be automated, for example, all of those bits and pieces. The process that you're advocating, the steps that you're advocating, help you do the big framework that then allows things to fall out and go, oh, well, actually, yeah, that's a good place to focus on. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, so what you would choose to focus on or choose to automate comes as part of a process, but you first start with what would be called a landscape assessment, a situation analysis or diagnosis, or as I like to call it, like what game are we playing? What are we actually trying to achieve? And I could elaborate on that, but I'm conscious of going too far into that theory part of it. But really understanding what makes a difference here. I'll actually give you a very quick example, somewhat esoteric, but the game of golf is what's called loser's game. Now, not in the sense that the people who play it are losers, but it's a game that you win by not losing. So if you go around a golf course and you hit the ball into a lake, you lose a load of shots. That could probably ruin a round. And rather than doing that, if you just kind of took very small shots all the way around, you may well do better as a result. So the idea in a game of golf, and there's numerous examples of business as well, is that you win this by just not making a big mistake. So it's a loser's game, and the objective in that game the game you're playing, what you're trying to do well at if in a business, in a sort of loser's game scenario, is not make that big mistake. Trading financial markets is a good example of that. So that's an example of how you would analyze the situation, come up with what game are we and what game are we playing to set an objective. In a simplistic sense, it's not particularly aspirational to go, our objective is not to lose. Just an example of how you would focus on that. Understanding what that is, then what are the strategies, what are the choices you would make about resources available to you? What choices would you make in order to best achieve that objective in a competitive environment? Once you've made those strategic choices, then the measures of that come into play, but also where with each of these choices does automation actually help those choices be more effective in order to achieve that objective. So it comes in that process. Once you've made the decisions, you've made those choices, how then can you help those things work more effectively, work more towards achieving that objective? I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. I'll give you an example. A big thing now with automation is sort of content creation, particularly using AI, for example. What would be a bad idea is to create more content that isn't focused, more spam, essentially. That sounds obvious. The vast majority of content I've seen, courses I've looked at, even conferences I've attended, are about using AI to create more content without a focus on what that content would actually do. So it's, by my definition, very unstrategic. That's a problem with digital marketing in general. AI is going to make it worse. Whereas what automation could do is really enhance personalization in email campaigns or even dynamic websites to the point that every single person who goes onto your website gets fed a different website according to who they are or what you may know about them in an automated way. So automation can be strategic in helping achieve those objectives, in a practical example being about targeting rather than being about more of the wrong thing.
That makes sense.
I still feel like I rambled a lot. But
those are great examples. And I'm conscious that although you are talking about a one-page strategic objective, that's not where your work with your clients finishes. It's not just giving them a bit of a plan and disciplining. You actually help with an element of execution, introduction, implementation, don't you? So tell me more about that part of your role.
So the strategic framework, the strategy one-pager, what I've talked about, more often than not with clients, I work on what I could call a marketing one-pager, but work around marketing strategy or brand strategy through to the execution of that. And that would be things like product market fit. So what market is there for your product and how would you talk about or even adapt that product in order to find a fit where there is a market that you can actually sell it. Value propositions is a very similar area, but it tends to be a term used as well. Growth or growth marketing, sort of building on that product market fit, building on that value proposition. And then what's called brand strategy, which is the more traditional way to talk about product market fit. It's positioning and targeting, but it's essentially product market fit if you're old. So I do spend a lot of time doing that as well. And then we would, having done that, we would look to even source, like if I work with a startup, we'll work on their product market fit, we'll work on their go-to-market strategies, we'll work on how they're going to go about acquisition and retention, and then I'll help them hire someone who can do that into the future. And those, particularly for small companies, marketing automation tools, for example, we met at the Active Campaign Study Hall. Active Campaign is a good example of that, particularly in the B2B world. Once you know what your value proposition is, what your product's about, what your messaging strategy is, you could cover just about everything else in an automation sense using Active Campaign with some help.
That's kind of how this initiative for the business started, in the fact that having built other businesses, got it to a stage achieving great things, it could run without me. what shall I do next? Starting up the next business, and I brought Automate team on board to help me with my digital marketing elements. And then I thought, actually, the main target of what I'm trying to do, I'm getting not a lot of traction with that. But the guys that are helping me doing this is what I need. This is what lots of my peers need. And then you go back out speaking to the same people, offering them a different proposition. It's one of those, oh, great. Now go away and do it for me. Now, yeah. So rather than having more resource to do stuff, it's having more automation to do stuff. You're achieving the same things and becoming efficient, but through thinking about the logic of automation. And you say not everybody is great at going black and white straight down there and looking at all the decision-making trees, but you know where you want to be. It's how do you get that route to get there, isn't it? So it's that.
And you can't make those fundamentally important decisions if you're spending all your time doing the marketing automation piece. I mentioned ActiveCampaign, but there's another tool called Gong, which you may have come across in meetings, typically online sales meetings. It'll help set up the meeting, send reminders, record and transcribe the meeting, summarize it, including action steps. And I know from my days in sales, that can take a lot longer to do than say, and is something that is, in a timing sense, very, very important. So follow-up emails after a sales meeting, for example. And automation can help do all that, and it frees up time then to go and argue with the marketing department as needs be. So, like you say, making all those decisions take time, take understanding, and automation can help free up that time in order to apply that understanding.
I think there's almost new careers or various parts of the market. I mean, sales ops, rev ops, research ops, all of those kind of bits and pieces that go behind supporting the structure of the delivery of the key thing, whether that's the collection of the revenue, whether that's the sales, whether that's the recruitment of the participant, delivering them to the research agency. Those are quite distinctive little niches that seem to be happening now, because as you say, at the end of the day, we've got those just let me do the key that I'm good at while there's somebody doing all the complicated stuff behind. But actually there's a process that's involved there with tech. Let's put them together and then I just purchase the bit I want. And I suppose that takes you to a lot of the SaaS services, doesn't it? That whole have that service, have that button, and it does all the fancy things behind. And I know you work with SaaS businesses as well, don't you? So I must admit, I'm quite intrigued. How does the thinking behind people starting up a SaaS business vary between that of doing with consumer goods, for example, doing the sports goods that you've done? What sort of learnings are there between the two that you've taken from one to the other?
To a large extent, it's around the same sort of areas, identifying the things that take time but aren't adding value but are necessary, and looking for a way to automate those. In terms of a sales relationship, even a marketing relationship, the difference between a SaaS business and an ongoing long-term physical product business, for example, isn't that different. It's about delivering the value, being attentive, being a partner, constantly over time. And I think in the day-to-day process of that, there isn't much difference in terms of a sales relationship and this consideration for that. For example, a lot of the big FMCG companies, typically fast-moving consumer goods, kind of stuff you buy in a supermarket. At the top end, sort of the highest volume end, the suppliers will do the ordering for the supermarket. They'll take over that role, that process. There needs to be an amount of trust for the supermarket to allow them to do that. But what it comes from is a concept where the supplier knows more about that category and that particular product in the supermarket. That's selling a range of products, targeting shoppers, looking at a range of pricing and so on. They're not experts in nappies, for example. Whereas that whole nappy category, someone like Pampers will know more about because that's what they do on a global scale. Understand the shopper that is, I've gone into nappies now, but understand the nappy shopper. And to the extent that the supplier then of Pampers or whoever would do the ordering for them. So build that kind of relationship. So I've seen situations where the supplier is literally sitting at the desk of in ordering departments. It's automated now, but physically there as well has happened in the past where they will do that. So you build this element of trust, and that positive sales relationship is very, very similar to how we work with SaaS. on a fundamental level. One is, ones and zeros, and there's whatever goes into nappies, but it's the same sort of relationship. Where there is a difference and less to do with that kind of sales relationship is that there's, and this is reflected in what I call traditional marketing and marketing through digital channels, is that in SaaS, you'll tend to launch a product and then fix it as you go along. It's why I wouldn't buy a car made by a tech company. And that idea and understand that dynamic within the marketplace is, I think, the biggest difference. And it's less to do with an automation sense. It's to do with a market understanding and perhaps a sales relationship sense rather than anything else. But that's where I find the difference. I'm a huge advocate of the fundamentals regardless of what you're doing. And I think that applies to the differences in what I work on between those two kinds of industries.
So thank you for joining us for this episode of Team Talks today. We hope you found that aha moment to help you on your journey towards automation and business growth. Don't forget to subscribe in the link below and tune in next time where we'll explore. Until then, remember to tame your tech and keep pushing those boundaries.